The Arctic is now the world's largest emerging market. It has huge amounts of energy resources, huge fishery stocks, and there are important trade and transshipment routes as well. And so all of the world's major economies and powers are clamoring for access to the Arctic. And the question of whether that's going to turn into a zone of really tough competition and tension, or whether it will be managed, is a really important issue for our time.
This is At Brookings, a weekly in-depth look at issues behind the news. This week, the Arctic. Are tensions brewing over the world's largest emerging economy?
The Arctic is one of the world's largest emerging markets. It offers rich fisheries, oil and gas reserves, and due to climate change, trade routes that are increasingly more accessible and more coveted. In his paper, Chill Out, senior fellow Bruce Jones examines the growing importance of the Arctic and says that this is an area that's ripe for international tensions. So as this region opens up, Bruce, the fundamental question is about sovereign rights, especially among the so-called Arctic Five, which is the United States, Russia, Canada, Denmark, and Norway. Tell me more about this.
The question of sovereignty is a really important one, and primarily it's regulated by the law of the sea. Despite the fact the United States hasn't signed the law of the sea, the law of the sea sets out limits, territorial limits on the continental shelf, so the territory off your land border underneath the water that still counts as your sovereign territory. And a big issue right now in the Arctic is mapping those claims, regulating those claims, and really trying to lock down the question of which states that border the Arctic itself have sovereign control over which territories and which part are part of open oceans. And then, of course, a lot of other states that don't border the Arctic also want access to those transshipment routes and to those energy resources. China, India, a lot of states are making claims on their ability to work in the Arctic and trade through the Arctic.
Bruce, there are some who think that because of the richness of the area, because of the oil and the gas reserves, because of the trade passages, that the Arctic could become the next contentious region among world leaders. Do you see that happening?
It's a perfect storm of issues. There are security issues, there are sovereignty issues, energy issues, trade issues, transit issues, indigenous peoples, fishery issues, and environmental issues, all bundled together in that case. And these are not minor players at the table either. The United States and Russia are both right at the table, as well as the other bordering states, Canada, Denmark, and Norway. So it's a very important test case of whether or not we can come up with the kinds of arrangements to govern those tensions, to manage those conflicts. And what's striking to me about the Arctic is so far we've been successful. A lot of people have been warning that the Arctic is going to be a new zone of conflict, particularly between the United States and Russia, and that's just not proving to be true. That's why we titled the paper Chill Out. It's not designed to say there's nothing to worry about, but actually, against predictions, new governance arrangements are keeping up with the tensions, at least so far.
And a lot of that is due to the middle powers, Denmark and Norway, and they're helping to tamp down tensions.
I think a critical factor in the Arctic has been the role that middle powers have played in brokering those arrangements. We spent a lot of time looking at how it is that international governance arrangements come about, and it's very frequently middle powers who put the arrangements on the table. They have stakes in the game, but they don't have vital stakes, or they're not as high as the stakes that the United States and Russia or China have. So middle powers are often able to negotiate, act as neutral brokers or third parties, and propose and sort of help negotiate management arrangements or governance arrangements, and that's what we've seen in the Arctic. Denmark and Norway have played a critical role in de-escalating tensions and putting in place arrangements, treaties, informal arrangements that are helping the states manage the Arctic.
And even so, much of the disputed territory among the Arctic Five is actually beyond their legal boundaries, right?
Each state has a limited terrain in which it can make sovereign claims. And one of the things that's, I think, helpful in managing disputes in the Arctic is that most of the energy resources that we know about are inside those sovereign domains. So Russia has huge energy claims, but they're largely inside its sovereign territory, so does Canada. What we don't know yet is how much energy is going to be found in those areas that are outside of sovereign control. And if there are substantial energy reserves outside of sovereign control, then we're going to see a new round of disputes and a new round of intensifying competition.
And you've said what's going on in the Arctic really offers lessons in how to handle other maritime issues. What are we learning from the Arctic region?
I look at the Arctic as a case study in the ways in which we can take an issue where great powers, the United States and Russia in this case, have issues that they care a lot about, sovereignty, energy, trade, etc., and put in place informal and formal arrangements to help them manage those manage those interests and manage that competition. It's not heavy-duty, formal, multilateral arrangements. They're light, flexible, informal tools that can de-escalate tensions and manage competition. And I think there's a lot to learn from that about how we approach issues like the South China Seas, which is an order of magnitude more difficult, but nevertheless, it seems to me we shouldn't be approaching it as if it's impossible to handle these kinds of tensions. In fact, there's a lot of experience from different parts of the world in maritime issues and others in putting in place the kinds of arrangements we're seeing in the Arctic to de-escalate tensions and handle disputes and resolve some of the underlying problems. And I think we should take inspiration from that. Some of the lessons apply fairly precisely. Some of them should simply encourage a type of approach of brokering informal arrangements to help manage tensions.
What about climate change in the region? Is it a ticking clock?
It's a slow ticking clock. I don't think we know much about the way in which climate change is playing out in particular regions in the short term. Certainly there is the sense that climatic change has accelerated the melting of the Arctic cap. We don't know at what pace that will continue. But in my lifetime, we'll see gradual shifts, not radical shifts. But they're already at a point where that trade route is open most of the year, most years. That could accelerate to the point where it's open all year round, all years, but that'll take time.
Stay up to date with the latest research, learn about Brookings events, and search our directory of experts. All from your mobile device. To download Brookings for your BlackBerry, Android, iPhone, or iPad, go to brookings.edu/mobile.